Hey, everybody, welcome back to Simply ICS Cyber. My name is Don C. Weber. I'm the cybersecurity guy.
And I'm Tom Van Norman. I'm the ICS OT guy. And today we have Joe Slowik. He's going to talk to us about some threat intel. Joe, a lot of people know you from all the threat intel work that you've done and published and all that stuff. But why don't you give the audience a quick rundown on who you are and what you do?
Sure. So thumbnail sketch. Currently, I am over in Data Miner where I'm director of cybersecurity alerting strategy. Prior to that, I've been a number of places. So most recently, the MITRE Corporation, where I was doing some work on critical infrastructure security and the attack framework. I got my start in cybers in the U.S. military, back in the Navy, way back in the day. Moved over to DOE at Los Alamos National Laboratory that had stops at places like Dragos, Domain Tools, and a couple other spots. So been around and just hoping to take the fight to the bad guys,
Yeah, Joe, first of all, thank you for your service. Really appreciate that. And, one of the things that I thought about when I was thinking about inviting you, and I was talking to Tom about it, when we think about threat intelligence and we think about the way I think about it is, that this is ingest of information so that organizations can be prepared, so that they can plan out some of their defenses, but also understand what they should be looking at. But usually that's for an organization that has a more robust cybersecurity program, risk management team, a SOC that's actually looking at stuff. And I think it's really important that we understand these concepts, organizations, teams, cybersecurity teams do. But for the teams that are challenged, that are just starting out, should they really be looking at cyber threat intelligence, or should they be focusing on other things to get to move in that direction where it's actually useful?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. And to answer that, I think we first need to take a step back and think about what the heck is threat intel really mean, or intel for that matter really mean. And at the end of the day, all intelligence is decision support. Stakeholders, asset owners, defenders, plant operators, engineers, etc., need to make decisions. When do I apply this patch? Do I need to go outside of normal procedures? What rules do I need to implement on my firewall or for remote access purposes? And those decisions face uncertainties. What's going to be the implications of this? What's the cost that I might not be aware of? How does this relate to what adversaries are doing? And where intelligence should step in is reducing, maybe not eliminating because that's hard, but reducing the uncertainty around those decisions. And from that perspective, I don't know who's a Ratatouille fan, Pixar movie fan or whatever here, everyone can cook. Everyone can use threat intel at the end of the day because we're all decision makers that face gaps in understanding. The degree to which we could use it is going to change, and what we can reasonably subscribe to and ingest is going to be dependent upon program maturity, what sort of items are available to that program. But everyone benefits from making better decisions. It's just a question of how are you going to implement that. So for example, if I'm a plant owner or plant operator and I'm trying to evaluate CISA just released in their weekly bulletin, here's these 5 ICS vulnerabilities or whatever. Okay, cool story. Add them to the list. We'll patch it next downtime. Well, wait a minute. Maybe it's worth doing a quick search or looking out in the community for is anyone talking about these? What's the nature of this vulnerability? Is it remotely exploitable? Does it require that you be able to authenticate to the device? If it does, it's ICS. So I could just turn the thing off at that point. So what's it really matter? But being able to really then flesh out the so what, the why behind these things, even if it's not at the, gold-plated, here's your 20-page report on APT, Fozzie Bear, and what they're doing geostrategically with respect to, Ruritanian independence or some other goofy topic. I'm sorry, that's a very niche audience, but there's a lot of scope for everyday folks within the realm of open source and available information to leverage threat intelligence or threat intelligence like sources to guide decisions that have implications on everyday operations.
Joe, one of the things that we read often in the news, I think a lot of people realize that the news is not your threat intel feed. The
Mhm.
news is has a drama twist to it, or a political twist to it, right?
Yep.
But even in some of the threat intel feeds that we read now, name nation states. Does the nation state really matter? Does your attacker really matter, or do the TTPs matter when you're a defender trying to defend the network based off of threat intel?
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw out the weasel word answer of it depends. um, because it really depends. Like, what am I trying to do here? What's the decision I'm trying to support? What is it that I'm trying to achieve? So again, if I'm, you know, Kate, the plant engineer that's operating my OT environment and trying to figure out, like, okay, what do I need to do for remote access solutions and minimizing attack surface? I don't care who it is. I just care that there's lots of entities that are doing things like credential capture and reuse, using and abusing single factor authentication. And I need to solve that problem because lots of folks are doing it. It's not a Volt Typhoon or a Russia or a whatever thing. It's an everybody thing. So I just need to identify what is it that threats are doing and base my operations off of that. If I go to different levels of decision making, like, hey, do I want to open up a plant here? What are the implications of that? Or what, for my operations in country X, what does that mean in terms of a risk proposition? That might matter a little bit more to try to get an idea for who's involved. I still think that's a little maybe overblown to an extent, and that at the end of the day, a lot of the who's responsible, like unless you're law enforcement, the military, or CTI weenies that just like following this stuff along, it doesn't end up mattering a whole lot for the day-to-day decision making.
So
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm trying to think of more of these concepts from a leadership standpoint, in making decisions, whether it's a maintenance updates or it's going into, like you just said, should we be building a plant or purchasing a plant here? What is that risk around that to those operations and our business? I mean, I think the industry has built a robust information gathering and delivery. There's many organizations that are doing this. You've worked for a lot of them, help establish some of the direction for a lot of those things. From a leadership standpoint, all the way down to, like, I would think, like chief engineers, is it almost their responsibility to be up to date in with some of this information details coming out of cyber threat intelligence?
To an extent, yes. And this is a tricky answer because on the one hand, like I look at this, if you were a commodities trader, like you should be following things like weather reports and stuff because it's part of your job. If you are what's another good example? A pilot, you should be monitoring things like trends in terms of aviation, figuring out the domain in which you operate. And I think it is incumbent on professionals at this point to have an understanding of like what's impacting my domain. What things do I need to worry about? So that's one side of it. The other side is, okay, domain operators need to know what's going on in the realm that they're operating. Are we providing them with the most appropriate and accurate and useful information for them to ingest? And I think that's an actual issue, because going back to Tom's question earlier, like, okay, really cool, Volt Typhoon, they're PRC focused and are going to do bad things if China invades Taiwan and all this. I don't care, man. I need to figure out how I get through the next week, the next month. Tell me something that I need to know right now. And some of the bigger picture stuff is very interesting and is important for certain audiences. But if I'm talking about folks that are ground floor in the moment of trying to get things to work, they need information relevant to what it is they're doing. And I think as an industry or as a discipline, the whole CTI, industrial complex, Twitter mafia, whatever you want to call us, isn't doing as good of a job as we could to inform or make information available that is useful for those audiences. And that's not good.
Is this just going into the Kev list? I mean, is that really what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, it may be as simple as that. Although I would caution the Kev list. Remember, like that is built around U.S. government systems, not necessarily your system. So just because it's known exploited means it's known exploited as far as things that CISA is monitoring, not what you might be interested in other areas. Anyway, that's a
no, that's great.
Always know who's speaking, know what their data sources are, know what their remit is.
The Joe. So where can the average person get these data feeds, either paid or free, or combination of both?
I mean, I'm going to be blunt and say paid for the most part. Like, honestly, not really for a lot of your day-to-day stuff. I think there's been a drift. I think folks are trying, but there's a real disconnect. And this is where folks that are subscribing to these feeds need to be really blunt and maybe even work around their own internal CTI shop to say like, hey, this is what we really need in order to run the environment. So how do we get that? But outside of that, social media still is pretty valuable. It's fragmented a bit over the last couple of years for reasons that I don't want to get into now because that gets a little edgy. So you've got your Twitter, X, your Blue Sky, your Mastodon and LinkedIn or whatever, but figuring out who are folks that are in the space that say things relevant to what it is that you're trying to achieve and listening to what they say, I think is a good first step of getting a sort of near real time perspective or look into what's going on. And there is a cost associated with that in terms of time and wading through lots of BS, like things that I post on social media. But if you can work your way through all the junk, there's still, the ability to extract near real-time knowledge out of this, even if it's just spending 15 minutes scrolling through a couple of accounts that are high fidelity to get a feel for like what's going on right now. That's not an unbearable cost, and you can do that while you're taking a coffee break or maybe another kind of break, depending upon your environment and its reception.
Joe, one more question. We'll flip over to Don. We both worked with each other at Dragos, and we've been talking for years now. One of the things that I've seen over the years, whether working for a company or consuming the information here, is the lack of actionable information. You read a bunch of stuff on a report, you're like, that's great. What do I do? Have we improved that at all, industry? And a full disclosure, I do not read Intel reports on a daily basis. I get my Intel from Don and from you and from other people. So has this improved at all?
Slightly. I think we still have a lot of ways to go on that front. You think about things like, and we need to provide identification of adversary behaviors and not just indicators. Great. Okay, what are you doing? Like, well, here's a list of all the MITRE ATT&CK IDs that this threat actor used. Like,
what do you do with that?
Right. What do you do with that? And this gets into a much longer discussion about attack. And it's like, okay, attack is based upon you have high-level tactics that an adversary needs to achieve, techniques that allow them to achieve it, and then the specific procedures that implement them. And instead, we're kind of operating in this little murky middle area that is easy enough for organizations to just like label things, but not specific enough for reading or consuming organizations to do something with it. And that's problematic. So there's a number of things that we need to think about when it comes to this space. Anytime I write something, I wrote a blog about scattered spider stuff or whatever a week ago, because why not? That's popular right now. Every time I write something, I'm always asking myself, like, what can someone who actually needs to know about this or care about this walk away from and do about it? And I think that's something from a CTI perspective that more analysts need to keep in the back of their heads of who's my audience and what can they do with this information? And I'm not saying that people are doing this maliciously. I think it's just an oversight that people get so wrapped up in the analysis bit that they forget at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the audience can't do something with it.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, Don. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, and really, I was just going to pull that thread a little bit further. I think where you kind of going, Tom, and it was where I was going. Joe, if you had to give an example, like how somebody successfully, do you have a story? I know I'm kind of putting you on a spot. I didn't ask you to come with a story, but do you have a story about how somebody, a small team, small organization, leveraged threat intelligence to make decisions and be proactive?
How small of a team?
Um, I'll let you pick it. I mean, it's. I mean, really, our audience comes from a varied backgrounds. Some smallers, mediums, and larges. Any example, I think, can be leveraged by a team. So you pick it.
Yeah. So maybe a more medium-sized team, given the kind of equipment we're talking about in play. But I think this has lessons for a lot of folks. But back during COVID, so 50 years ago, it feels that way sometimes, doesn't it? But there was a patch released by F5 for their big IP devices. So load balancers, pretty important, especially on the IT side. But there's OT applications too, so that's something for this audience to ignore. But anyway, it was a remote code execution vulnerability, pre-authentication, and it's like, okay, it's a load balancer. We can't just like slap a patch on this and move on. We have to validate that it works with our config. We have to restart the device, which means we probably get an availability hit. So we're doing this after hours, most likely, or have to make sure there's a failover and such. Like, all right, this is bad, but we're going to move this into, we'll get to this during standard processes, especially because this came out, I think, June 28th, 29th or whatever during COVID. So a couple of days before 4th of July, which was on a Friday, I think, that year. So coming right up on a 3-day, 4-day weekend, depending on how nice your company is. Well, the thing is that if you were monitoring chatter around that or following other folks who were doing so, you would have realized that within about 24 hours of the patch coming out, that people managed to reverse engineer it. And the exploit for that fit within a legacy tweet, like 120 characters, in order to get root command execution on these devices. That is an immediate signal that it's like, okay, I need to talk to my organization that as much as the network engineers or whoever owns this device are looking forward to their, 96 or whatever they're getting with respect to the holiday weekend, they're going to have to put in some overtime in order to patch this, because otherwise we're going to call the incident response team when we get back from the weekend, because we have a critical device that's been popped. And I know a couple of organizations that benefited from that in being able to identify quickly disseminated, freely disseminated, although not always the easiest to find, information that allowed them to better categorize a vulnerability in advance of it. Well, the KEB didn't even exist at this point, but in advance of having the 5-page write-up or whatever of like, oh, the North Koreans were exploiting this for reasons. It's like, no, you need to do that now. And I think that's another area where CTI, whether we're talking about supporting small teams, enterprises, or whatever, needs to do a better job, is that good enough information right now is oftentimes going to be better than the best information tomorrow, next week, or next month. And thinking about that timeliness aspect is critical in figuring out, how do I actually align with ops level decision making to defend and protect my environments?
Yeah, that really reminds me of the Pulse Secure VPN issue that was probably right around the same time for that.
There's been so many of those. There's a couple going on right now. So yeah,
well, it's all about the remote access. And actually, in some of my research I was doing and looking at some of the threat reports, a lot of emphasis that threat actors are focusing on secure remote access capabilities, whether they're the endpoints or they're the solution. So what are your thoughts around leveraging that type of information?
It's critical to monitor right now. So for folks who have been keeping an ear to the ground on trends and such, just look at the Verizon DBIR or the M-Trends report for this year, looking at incident analysis and incident trends. This, or 2024, or up to whenever they were cut off for reporting for their reports in 2025, for the first time in a decade, exploitation, whether application or endpoint exploitation, overtook phishing as the primary initial access mechanism for threat actors. That's a big deal, because we always think like, oh, end users are the problem. If only they wouldn't click on the fish. It's like, no, end users are not the biggest problem. And there's a lot to be said for that line of argument outside of that. But anyway, the problem is insecure software, insecure devices. And whether we're talking about your high-end threat actors like your Volt Typhoons and Sandworms that are doing secret squirrely nation state stuff to try to disrupt OT operations, or eventually disrupt OT operations, or pick a number of ransomware providers, they are identifying many times as true 0 days, developing exploits and leveraging these vulnerabilities in your VPN gateway, in your firewall, in other sorts of items that are presumably there to secure your network, to break into it, to harvest credentials, to move laterally, and then do bad things as a result. So just even identifying those trends is critical to inform things like software lifecycle management, appliance management, patching life cycles, and similar, attack surface management and exposure. The other side of this too, lots of folks, well, maybe not lots of folks, but enough folks are familiar with things like the cyber avengers and other sort of BS threat actors. Ron Fabella did a great presentation at the last S4 about less than sophisticated threat actors, which is worth watching on this subject. But another element, especially for the OT environment, is understanding threat actors are going to be able to identify what I've externally exposed if they want to. And if I'm exposing things, whether it's something that's just single factor authentication that can be brute forced, or heaven forbid, it is a HMI panel that is internet accessible or something, someone's going to find it. And you're lucky if it's going to be one of these lower tier cyber computer network annoyance entities like a Cyber Avengers that's just going to deface it with Free Palestine or Down with Ukraine or heaven knows whatever else they're doing. That's the best case scenario, because the worst case scenario is that someone's going to start clicking buttons and do something really nasty. So that's the other aspect of this, as well as understanding that server side or application side exposure piece and how that aligns with adversary trends, so that even if I'm a small organization, doing something just as quick as like, hey, what's internet facing? Should it be? And if it is, how do I lock that down? Is pretty critical, whether it's I'm worried about the PRC or worried about the latest ransomware variant that happens to be out there right now.
That's specifically why I focused that remote access, identifying remote access endpoints, identifying users that had been a part of breaches when I did the SANS ICS Summit OSINT workshop. That, thank you. You looked over that for me, and I was happy when you didn't have a lot of comments or redirections around some of that stuff. So that's why I kind of focused on that, and I think you just supported that.
Yeah, figuring that stuff out is key, because if you don't, someone else is going to, and depending on who that someone else is, it might just be really annoying and embarrassing, or it might be a resume generating event for a lot of people.
Joe, a few minutes ago, you made a comment about having good information quick versus perfect information further away. I think that's a great point that a lot of people should pay attention to. That read those releases, read those things, whether it's your gateway device or whether it's another part of your crown jewels. Take action on it. It may not be perfect. I read a vulnerability about 3 weeks ago, two or 3 weeks ago, about the train, the end of train radio thing on it.
Yep.
And it was 10 years old. The vulnerability was found a decade ago. You read through the report and the action items, how to mitigate the risk and things like that, was use a VPN when connecting from the internet. Well, these things are not connected to the internet. It is a point-to-point, essentially radio with some detection on an IO on it that tells the other end of the train that, hey, this thing's no longer here.
Yep.
Basic layman terms here, but the actionable information was create a VPN down when you connect to the internet. How do you do that? Right.
I'm dealing with RF here. Like, what's going on?
It's good that they release that. It's good that all the intel reports are released. Take them for what they're worth when they are released quickly. Take a step back and maybe look at a couple of different sources to see, all right, what exactly am I dealing with? What and how do I lower that risk or mitigate this threat. Lot of really cool stuff here that we're talking about, and we have about 5 minutes left for this episode. Is there anything that you want to get your last plug in, whether it's AI or ML or what to use or not to use, or your thoughts on Vault, Typhoon, or anything just in the last few minutes?
Actually, I want to piggyback on what you just brought up with that train control item, because it also made me think when that came out, there was that report on how you could hack into the wireless control system for a lot of things like distribution control systems in Germany and Central Europe or whatever, that was all taking place over the radio that wasn't internet connected. It's insecure, it's not good, but also there needs to be, I think when it comes to, and this is really appropriate because for when we're recording this, at least, DEF CON is next week at this point in time, that we're going to see lots of things about scary exploits and scary vulnerabilities and things that a lot of us also need to take a step back and understand and realize, well, how are these things actually installed, employed, and used? Not everything necessarily is internet connected or facing. It's important to recognize that the air gap is not the solution to many things anymore, but there really are still some things that it's unless you're hacking via radio and are physically located near your target, it's not a viable option in order to interact with some of these things. Or the other thing that I like to emphasize when it comes to OT security research, it's you are able to do this really cool thing on the control system. That's great. There's a brake valve sitting just outside or whatever of where this device is. That's going to make sure whatever nasty thing that you do, it's going to vent product or something, which isn't ideal, but nothing's going to blow up. So remembering that engineers have been doing this stuff for a minute or two.
Oh yeah.
And recognizing that safety and reliability has been built into these systems, often through very painfully and including deadly lessons learned, that it's not just all about the cybers sometimes. And having that perspective, I think, is key when doing research into this space, as well as for advocating for how do I respond to these attacks. Some of it might be just you know what? I have a safety system that is isolated from everything else that'll step in and make sure that, it's not going to be a good day for the plant, but it's not going to be a terrible day, and I can recover from that. And knowing and understanding that is key.
At the same time, the cybersecurity guy, right? Cybersecurity people, we're really proud, especially if we're researchers. We're really proud about knowledge around that subject. And I try to highlight, and every time I'm talking about this takes a conversation. Yes, the risk around some of these exploits, you can do certain things, they can be mitigated, but perhaps it's not necessarily all the information. Those engineers might not understand it completely. And so it takes a collaboration, an understanding of having that conversation. Here's what we think that it can do this, this, and this. It gets them there. These communications. Okay. And then the engineers should take that information, providing some of the data about the countermeasures, but being accepting of that stuff and not just saying that, oh, well, that'll never happen. They won't do that or anything like that. Both sides need to calm down a little bit, have adult conversations around these things. And at the end of the day, cybersecurity professionals, you need to realize that they might not care, and that's okay. They've accepted that risk. It's okay to let go of that and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, everyone could use a dose of humility sometimes and realize that we're all in this together, trying to fight the same fight.
He was looking at you, Tom. Joe, we're right at the end. Where can people find you? Where should they be looking for you?
I'm all over. I'm not hard to find. LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Twitter a little bit. I have my own company, Paralysis LLC, for training and other stuff or whatever that I throw out to the community. I am a Google search and a couple of links away for the most part.
100%. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye, y'all.